Welcome to Watches with Dennis, and this is a question and answer or Q&A episode. So basically what I do is I throw up a little Q&A image, I put that up in the YouTube community section, and I do it on Instagram as well. I take a few questions, and then I go ahead and I do a video like this. So I've got 5 questions today that I want to go ahead and cover, and let's go ahead and get started with the one I titled this episode about, which is what Joel Bolt 88 asks on YouTube. Should Rolex color match its date windows for Cyclops models? In my opinion, no. I just sit and think a little bit about this because anyone who's watched my channel for a while, especially the live streams, has heard me talk about and really sort of judge watches, expensive watches, for not having color match date windows. And I think the reason why I'm okay with it here, and it's not a Rolex specific thing, it's the Cyclops, and that part of the question is what really honed in on it. A lot of times I think what we as watch collectors want is a date window that blends in if we have to have one. While the broad public at large is generally pretty accepting of date windows, in fact, they sell better than non-date watches, a lot of collectors tend to prefer the symmetry of no dates, myself included, though I have a mix of both types in my collection. So when I see a date window, if it blends in and it's subtle, I tend to favor it more than if it's just what kind of looks like that cheap, hey, it all comes as a white disc. Let's have a white disc with a black font date window in the watch and just leave it at that as an afterthought. And that I normally push against when we're getting into the multiple thousands of dollars for watches. However, I think in the case of using a Cyclops, we're already calling a lot of attention to the date window. It's not subtle. There's this huge dome affixed on top of the sapphire crystal that is screaming for people to notice what is underneath it. In that instance, you might as well have the date window stand out. Now, Rolex just seems to use, at least as far as I've seen, white on basically all of the watches. So I own an Explorer 2. It has a date window, but it's the polar dial, so it is pretty well color matched. But obviously, there are a lot of exceptions to that. And as I noted, this isn't a Rolex specific thing. I think the same thing for Seiko, where they use their Cyclops, and any other watch brand that does it. I think in that instance, if you're basically screaming, here is the date window, you can go ahead and do what you want. It's not about being subtle anymore. Next question, also from YouTube, is from Scotty Pinball, who asks, why don't more watch brands use a big date? I don't know the answer to this, so my guess would be, depending on the company, broadly speaking, it's just the inaccessibility of mass-produced third-party movements that have big date complications. It's just not a common movement type that's out there and available. And it makes a lot of sense why it isn't. In terms of balance and how much dial space that's going to take, that's something that then needs to be factored in. And as I noted in the first question, talking about the Rolex and the Cyclops date windows, I think in many instances, the date window might be added on for commercial reasons, but it's more of an afterthought. When you're going big date, you're clearly putting a lot of thought into the complication at that point. So I think that's a portion of it, but I think just broadly speaking, it's not the easiest movement to get a hold of. I know there are less expensive versions of big date watches that are out there, but you've got to accommodate 2 different discs in order to do it. There are different ways that watch brands go about taking care of that. Lange & uses them on 2 different levels. Glashütte Original has a big date where they actually have the discs on the same plane, which is pretty impressive. But again, this is all in-house sort of stuff. Lange's original version of the big date, I believe, comes from a movement that JLC had, and then JLC ended up developing a new big date after the rights to that version went over to Lange & So anyway, I'm kind of rambling. Long story short, I think it's just there aren't a lot of generic movements out there with the feature, so a lot of people don't really turn to that, especially when you think about the number of hardcore watch collectors that aren't into dates at all as a complication on their watch. Next question, this one's from Instagram from VB Jomo. He asks, what do you think, and I'm going to apologize for my pronunciations here, about the new Raymond Weil Millesime Moonphase Midnight Blue, specifically that it is rose gold PVD. Okay, so this watch overall, I like the look of, broadly speaking. I think it's pretty well balanced. The Moonphase does take up a lot of space, and I don't really care for that automatic word right across the dial there, or I should say across the portion of the dial where the Moonphase is out. It has the more whimsical kind of looking Moonphase as well, which I think is a nice touch. It's kind of playful. It's something that I kind of remember from lower cost watches back in the day. Personally, I think the watch overall would look a lot better as just its sort of sector dial format without the Moonphase. But I want to focus in specifically on the question about my opinion on the PVD. I am okay with PVD watches, but I personally would never really consider an expensive gold PVD. And this watch is over $2,000 retail US. So because of that reason, I would not turn to it, even though I think the color scheme with the midnight blue and the gold looks really good. I can't get behind it. My concern would be if I scratch through the PVD and I'm looking at the steel case, like how easy or hard is it to do that? I don't really own much in the way of PVD watches. I have a stainless steel Moser, which is PVD black, which is what I often associate PVD with, is a sort of a black coating. And I like to imagine that if I scuffed it up too much, and it's a pretty hardy PVD, but it does have some marks near the lugs, that there's probably a way to refinish that isn't perhaps overly expensive. I don't know. It's an expensive watch. But here, without trying to make it too snobby sounding, like if we're looking at gold color watches, my general rule is I want the watch just to be solid gold at this point. Obviously, that would raise the price a great deal versus just doing a coating. However, there are a lot of used gold watches, 18 karat gold watches that you can find. They'll probably be significantly north of $2,000, but significantly south of $10,000. So rather than turning into a PVD version of this, unless we were going ultra cheap PVD, like a Casio gold color, it's not real gold plate, it's just a gold color PVD or some such thing that's just a few $100, I wouldn't be able to pull the trigger on it because of the PVD nature. And it's not that I'm anti-PVD, it's that I really worry about scratching through gold, and it's an expensive watch. So I wouldn't be able to do it. Fourth question is from Neffville, who asked this on YouTube and actually asked several questions, but we're going to go ahead and focus in on the first one specifically, which is, has AP permanently gone off the rails, or are they ever going to get back to making the watches that got them into the Holy Trinity in the first place? So AP, for those that don't know, is Audemars Piguet, and I think the only way we're ever going to see them get back to the way they were is for the Royal Oak to start not doing well. And I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon. The good news is AP still has all of their complication watchmaking Holy Trinity chops. I still think they demonstrate that quite regularly. Yeah, you might have to go to like the Royal Oak Conceptuals or whatever, but they're sticking in complications in all sorts of watches. So they still know how to do complications. It's just, we often associate those with more dress watch features, and they seem basically hell-bent on sticking everything into a Royal Oak case. Do I think it makes everything look overly samey? Absolutely. And I would like to see them deviate a little bit more. Obviously, they've tried to do that with the code 1159, but currently AP has 4 lines of watches, and 3 of those 4 are some form of Royal Oak, with the code 1159 being the 4th. So not anytime soon. However, I do think eventually they will get back to it, because I have to believe at some stage, interest in all of these samey looking Royal Oak shapes is going to break. I kind of thought it would have happened by now, and it hasn't. So I'm at a loss to give you any better speculation other than at some point eventually. And I think we see AP showing signs of being worried about that by doing something like the 1159, clearly trying to show that they can go into some other space if and when Royal Oak interest dwindles. And the last question was also asked on YouTube from Dunderhay9169, who asks, what are you planning to buy next? I don't know. I don't know. I'm actually just currently enjoying my collection as it stands, so I'm not aggressively looking for anything in particular. But that's not a very interesting answer. So I know in some prior videos I've talked a little bit about some Breguets I've been thinking about. I'm still on a wait list for a no-date Rolex Submariner. I've gone ahead and looked a little bit at some stuff from Zenith, even though I already have a Zenith. I've really been wanting to look more into brands I don't own. So to throw out something that I'm not sure I've really discussed here before, one of the items I've been considering is something from Vacheron Constantin's catalog. Now, I've talked a little bit on live stream about the 1921, which would be more of a stretch watch, given the prices those go for even used. But what would be more achievable would be a VC Malt, if I'm saying that right, one of their tonneau-shaped watches. And I've been exploring the tonneau shapes for a little while, mostly on the Breguet side. However, part of my interest in the Malt is I could get something with a dark dial, like a black dial. And that's something that I've noticed about my dress watch collection. I currently have essentially 3 watches I consider true dress watches. I have a JLC Reverso, I have my Longa 1, and I have a Parmigiani Tonda, not the new PFs, but one of the older models that came on a strap. They are all light colored dials though, white or silver or champagne, all very light colors. I don't have a dark color dress watch. And I think the malt could be a good way to get an interesting shape that I've never owned before, but also get a dial color that not only do I not have it in dress watches, I tried to think, other than my Flieger, I don't think I have a black dial watch. It's not been a color I've ever really owned much of. So in that regard, that's kind of where I'm leaning towards. But again, I'm being real fickle on all of this. I'm bouncing all over the place in terms of what watch might be next to go into the collection. But anyway, that's it for this video. Please leave comments if you want to discuss anything I brought up in terms of these 5 questions I responded to. I'll put out a new Q&A at some point and solicit questions for another video elsewhere outside of these comments. But if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. It helps the channel. And if you want to be notified when I have new videos out, just click subscribe. Take care, everybody.